Hello, and welcome to Ruben Uncut. Today's topic, I can't believe I have to say this, but no, January 6th was not like the BLM protests. It just wasn't. But this seems to be a thing that is a real sticking point for some people. There's a lot of people in America who don't understand why this is different. And that's kind of fucking ridiculous. Let me be clear here. A major part of this appears to be that conservatives are allergic to context. So I'm just going to go on over some basic elements of these two events that make them very, very different. Now, from a distance, from a person who is not paying attention, I could understand some level of confusion. A person who doesn't understand the law or history or how the government works might, at a distance, if two pictures out of context were held up to them, might say that the things look about the same. But if you're a person who pays attention, then it makes me wonder how you tied your own shoes this morning that you can't see the difference, because it's pretty significant. First of all, let's talk about what they each were, okay? The BLM protests, some of which turned into riots, were protests set up and designed to draw public attention to the toxic relationship between police officers and the communities that they enforce the law with. The purpose of BLM is to draw attention to a serious thing that is occurring in society, something that they felt was not getting the due attention that it needed. That's not what January 6th was, and you need to start to understand that. January 6th was a bunch of people going to the Capitol to intervene in a process. And that process is the peaceful transference of power from one administration to the next. What they did was a direct interaction with the government. BLM is a community function. They are trying to specifically draw attention within communities because the police are a community-based branch of the government. They are connected to the state, not the federal, although the federal has their own cops. They're just different. Let's clear up some things about BLM riots and protests real quick. First of all, in most protest turned riot situations, they have turned riot for one of two reasons. Either there were people there who didn't have the best intentions on the side of the left, because there are people on the left who wouldn't mind breaking the windows of a Starbucks. Emphasis on Starbucks or Target or any other major corporate face. But the other reason that sometimes these protests turn into riots, is because that is part of police crowd control procedure. If you can escalate the crowd into violence, you have free rein to start rounding up or herding out the crowds. Once the crowd gets to a certain level of rowdy, you as the police are allowed to then just start whipping asses. And this is an actual technique that police use. Why do you think mysterious crates of bricks would show up at protests way in advance? Because there are people who want that. And those people are the people who oppose those protests, because when protests turn into riots, it muddies the water and upsets the overall message, a thing that sadly some people don't seem to understand. But also because that's what the cops want you to do. It makes them look good and you look bad. There have been situations, because you see, if the amount of property damage you do is greater than the number of faces that are bloodied and beaten that the media sees, the cops win. 93 to 9, the numbers I've seen have varied a little bit, but an estimate of 93 to 95% of all MLB, I'm sorry, BLM did it backwards for no reason. Protests were peaceful. And that's an important note. But you might be saying, but Ruben, why am I not aware of as much of those protests as the ones that got out of control? I want you to think about that for a little bit and realize that the answer is inside the question. People peacefully and calmly protesting and making themselves heard is a boring news cycle. People freaking out, throwing bricks through windows and setting a city on fire is an exciting news cycle. The media doesn't care about peaceful protests. Peaceful protests will at most get a, well, this happened today, and then they'll move right along to another story. But a protest where there's property damage is sexy. They want you to see that. They're excited to see that. The other thing that you might not be aware of, especially as it took place before January 6th in the year 2020, there were a great number of Black Lives Matter protests. However, out of all of them, only 11 people died. And on top of that, the 11 people who died were all protesters, not victims of protesters. BLM hasn't really killed anyone. And that's important to understand. In all cases, in 2020 at least, I'd have to look at other statistics to verify, but in those situations, those occurrences were protesters being killed, and get this, not by the police, but other civilian citizens. I'll be honest, I'm not really afraid of Trump as a person. I hear he smells like feces, and I'm pretty sure I could knock him over. But I am afraid of his followers. The people who worship Trump bother me incredibly and concern me for the future of not just America, but everything that these people touch. But let's move along. That's not just. There are also, as I'll get to in a little bit, plenty of well-meaning but easily misguided people who follow Trump as well. Misguided person can still shoot you in the face, though. So that's concerning. Now let's take a look at January 6th. What are some other key differences between January 6th and a BLM protest? Well, the answer is simple. Location, location, location. The location matters a lot. This is a key function of the context in this situation. BLM protests were held in city centers and commercial districts because this is where commerce is held. And where commerce is held, people are always paying attention. And if your goal is just to raise awareness, this is where you want to have your protest. Around the Starbucks and the Targets. Also, it's hard for some people, me included, to get upset when a Target or a Starbucks gets their shit wrecked. I'm sorry. Those are huge organizations who have insurance. I'm not particularly worried about their establishments. If a Target burns to the ground tomorrow in Cleveland, it will have zero effect on a family in Kentucky. But a group of people successfully storm the most federal building, the capital of the fucking country and not only interrupt, but negate the peaceful transfer of power in America, it will be felt across the country. It will affect the life of every single citizen and some of those non-citizens. Not that you'd care if you think January 6th was justified, which it wasn't. Do you understand? Do you see? Do you see the lines I am drawing here? Do you understand how these are incredibly important details of context? That if you cannot grasp these very incredibly specific details of what makes this different, you probably shouldn't be voting. I'm not saying you shouldn't have the right. I'm saying that maybe your time would be better spent just watching the Kardashians and masturbating, either to or separately from the Kardashians. Okay? Because these are very big differences. These differences matter. No matter how out of control a BLM riot could have gotten, it would never have affected states it didn't happen in. But this throws into question the safety and sanctity of our entire democracy. This is an attack on our democracy itself. Its function is anti-democratic, while the BLM protests, no matter how well or badly they went at their various locations, were actually freedom of speech. These people didn't just go there to protest. Lots of people have protested at the Capitol. A lot of them never get in. Some of them have gone in to do peaceful protesting, like sit-ins. These people didn't do a sit-in. In fact, these people didn't seem to be very good at protesting at all. They seem to be terrible at protesting. Although, to be fair, some of that is because of some things I'm about to clear up. There have been a number of questions that have been asked about January 6th, and there have been a lot of misinformation thrown around about January 6th. Let's start with the fact that there is zero evidence that Antifa was involved. We just don't have any evidence of it. I'm not saying it couldn't have happened, but we have zero evidence to suggest it. So we can't just assume it's a thing. That's not how reality works. That's not how good detective work works. That's not how good police work works. That's not how anything works. That's of a questionable intellect. For example, one of the main people that people like to point to as evidence in the early days of January 6th was to claim that this gentleman here, the QAnon shaman, as he was dubbed by the media and or the internet, who can tell anymore these days, a lot of people pointed to him as the potential Antifa. After all, what's going on with these tattoos? He looks like a freaking hippie. No, that guy can't be a Trump fan. First of all, I've met hippies who are Trump fans. God save us all. Second of all, if you don't recognize the fact that this man probably supports Trump, it's because you don't understand what this is on his stomach. You see that? That's an Odinson hammer. I might be pronouncing that wrong, but that, my friends, is a tattoo. It's a tattoo of a pagan white supremacist religion. This is a specific brand of paganism associated with thinking that white people are better, but also hating Christians at the same time. Fun, right? Who knows which way this guy would go in most situations, right? But anyways, let's move on. He's also got another pagan thing here. The Tree of Life deal. I don't know what this thing on his arm is. I think this is pagan, but it might be Nazi. I'm not sure. But to be fair, the Nazis stole a lot of symbolism from pagans, so who knows anymore, right? But it also doesn't help that this gentleman here, who now that he's been released from prison, he's got a shortened sentence for claiming a lot of things, all of which he has recanted, by the way, since he was released. Basically, they got this guy off on being incompetent and getting him to say that he was overly influenced by Donald Trump, or at least that's what he says. Now he denies it. Now he says that's just what his lawyer said to say so he could get out of prison sooner, which is very questionable trait in a human being, considering that he's currently running for public office. This dude is currently running for, I believe it's a local office. And he's running on a pro-Trump platform for anyone who still thought he might be Antifa. No, this dude's fash all the way, bro. He's not with the Antifa. Another thing that has been questioned a lot about it is a lot of people saying stuff like, oh no, the cops let us in. They practically gave us a tour. Now, a lot of people question this. And I will say, at first, I was like, what's that about? However, this question has been answered several times now. The reality of why this happened is a little something called crowd control technique. Essentially, once the Capitol Police realized that there was no way they would be able to stop the horde of violent, crazy people who were crawling over them to get into this building and breaking windows and doors, what do you do then? Well, what you do is you create a path of least resistance, tunneling the dangerous people, hopefully, away from your primary targets you're protecting. This is a standard security operation. So, no, this is in no way an indicator of anyone's innocence or a deeper conspiracy. This is a thing that this is just the standard operating procedure for what to do when that happens. And then you got riots, who there's a couple videos of him that don't look good, and that's what one text message that don't look good. Unfortunately, for the people who would like to throw Ray Epps under the bus, there's not a lot of evidence that backs it up entirely. If you have any, I'd love to see it. Feel free to send it to my email, rubenuncut@gmail.com. Love to see it, really. However, most of the footage that's out there and that I've seen, unfortunately, for the people who want to throw Ray Epps under the bus, it doesn't make Ray Epps look like a Fed. Although it's worth noting that the original thing that got him called a Fed was the fact that he kept trying to go around to people and say that we're doing this non-violently. In fact, there are more witnesses that have Ray Epps as telling them not to be violent than there are witnesses saying that he provoked them. And there's very little footage that confirms this, but there is footage of Ray Epps saying the words peacefully. So ultimately, regardless of what it is, there is currently nothing to fully substantiate the concept that Ray Epps orchestrated either the violence or that he is a federal agent. There's a lot of circumstantial, ooh, what's that? But the reality is that these things are not substantial enough to form a coherent argument that could ever last in court or prove anything at all. And until there's evidence, I'll be waiting. A fun fact. Now, another thing that's brought up is how clueless a lot of the protesters inside the Capitol building appear to be, wandering aimlessly and taking pictures like they're on a freaking tour. Well, we know why this happened too. You see, one of the things that has come out of the court cases in the text messages of the Proud Boys is simply this. That was always part of their plan. You see, the Proud Boys understood that they did not have the numbers to take the Capitol building. But they theorized that they could whip the mob up into some type of mob frenzy and use the sheer numbers of these normies, as they are called in the text messages, to help storm the Capitol. So yeah, a lot of people there, just dumbasses in the wrong place at the wrong time, when a bunch of right-wing weirdos decided to try and use them as human fodder. Something to think about if you're ever trying to, if someone ever tempts you into thinking that the Proud Boys are cool. Fun fact, the Proud Boys are not cool. They're excessively lame. But most of the people that I really need to give up on the Proud Boys don't understand that. Do you understand? Can you see it? Can you see how they're different? I am begging you to see how they are different. I assume that most people who listen to me understand what I'm talking about. I assume that, which saddens me. There would be nothing that would make me happier than to hear that someone who's previously thought that January 6th was cool could hear this and suddenly have it click into place in their brains as to why these things are different. Because frankly, I'm getting real tired of people bringing up BLM every time January 6th comes up. They are not the same. And here's another way that they're not. The government establishment never told BLM to do it. At no point did the government say, hey, do that thing. There were a handful of various politicians who gave it their approval. But this isn't the same thing, and you need to understand this. You can debate whether or not it's good that they would say that Black Lives Matter and that they stand by the principles that Black Lives Matter are representing. But the fact of the matter is that there was never a point where a politician posted anything that would suggest that the BLM movement members turn to violence. And there was at no point a democratic message that even went out to specifically organize them into any specific location or event. Now, I know what you're going to say. What about Kamala Harris tweeting that she would help pay to get people out of prison, pay their bail? Well, first of all, happened afterwards. Those messages came out after these protests had already been going on. Also, Kamala Harris is probably just trying to distract people from the fact that she kind of used to be a cop. Not a cop, but like definitely pro-cop and on the cop's side, and definitely put a lot of black dudes in prison. So maybe that's why she'd do that. I don't know. But the point is that's really not the same thing as the president trying to get you to march down to the Capitol to interrupt a governmental function with him. In fact, Donald Trump wanted to go. Donald Trump said he would go. Donald Trump didn't go because people around him were immediately like, no, that will be illegal. And then he didn't. And then on top of that, Donald Trump waited hours into the protest. I'm sorry. It's not an appropriate word at a certain point. It started as a protest. You can say that. But it turned into a full-blown assault on the Capitol. Just saying. Took hours into this before Donald Trump told the people to please leave peacefully. And even then, tacitly still stuck to the idea that he had been robbed, playing along with a narrative that he had been building since before the votes were even counted in 2016. Donald Trump and Steve Bannon, who I'm pretty sure gave him the original idea, we're always going to call foul play, no matter how legitimate the Democrats' win was. Rudy Giuliani has been caught lying so much at this point that one has to wonder how he has not grown a Pinocchio's nose right out the front of his face. The who, the what, and the where are all different. They are. They're all different between the BLM protest and the Capitol riot. The who, the what, and the where, completely different. And yes, those details matter. And we shouldn't have to explain this. When I think of the word common sense, everything I've just said, with the exception of the areas where I filled in some details and facts that I've learned, was common sense. I could use my common sense and understanding of the difference between commerce sectors and governmental sectors and the types of events that these events were to tell you that they are not the same. It's like saying that basketball and baseball are the same because they're both sports with balls. To a person who's never seen either, they just look like people playing with balls. But I assure you, they are different. And if you can't understand how these are different, then you need to evaluate your prejudice. You need to evaluate where you are in the world and what you believe in and how you arrived at those beliefs. Because at this point, I can only think of two reasons why someone would conflate the two things. Either A, they are a total brainwashed partisan hack, or they are bad faith muddying the waters to protect their own ego or to possibly criminally advance the movement of Donald Trump. I feel like that is enough screaming into the void for right now. If you enjoyed listening to this, then please follow me on Spotify or wherever else you get your podcasts. I'm not on everything, but I am on a lot of things. And also check out the YouTube channel Ruben Uncut. Yeah, that's the name in both places. And if you're on the YouTube already, please like and share and subscribe and all that jazz. If you'd like to communicate with me, as I mentioned earlier, my email is rubenuncut@gmail.com. If you actually listened to this point, I want to thank you very much. And also, have a wonderful whatever, wherever, whenever you are.